Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the complex news shaping your world.
So, you ever wonder how a conflict happening thousands of miles away could actually affect your portfolio? Well, today, we're tracing the ripple effects from these geopolitical hotspots directly to the Indian market, and yep, to some of its biggest companies. It's a direct line you might not see, but trust me, it's there.
Okay, so how are we going to connect all these dots? Here's our roadmap. We'll start with the global flashpoints, then tie them to the threat of rising oil prices, see how that hits India's economy, and finally, take a look at how specific companies are trying to navigate this whole mess.
All right, let's start with the first domino, those simmering tensions between the US and Iran. This isn't just another headline, It's really the trigger for a global economic chain reaction, and understanding it is absolutely crucial.
At first, it really looked like the markets were breathing a huge sigh of relief. There were these hopes of de-escalation, and it sent Wall Street on a rally. The tech-heavy Nasdaq even jumped over 2%. The big bet was clear. Hey, let's get back to business as usual, fast.
But here's where it gets a little strange. If you look closer at the US strategy, you see this major contradiction. The official goal is to pull back, right? Reduce hostilities. But the stated action? Hit them hard. That kind of mixed messaging is exactly what creates uncertainty and leaves the markets totally guessing.
And don't get me wrong, despite some optimistic headlines, the reality on the ground is still incredibly tense. That critical shipping lane, the Strait of Hormuz, is still a major flashpoint. Tankers are still getting attacked, and now US corporate infrastructure is actually a target. So yeah, this situation is anything but resolved.
So, this brings us to our first big takeaway. There's this huge disconnect between what the markets are hoping for and the actual geopolitical reality. Investors are crossing their fingers for peace, but the facts on the ground, they're pointing towards a lot more volatility.
And this tension, it's not just stuck in one area. Oh no, it's now spilling over into another critical shipping lane, the Red Sea. And that's where the story gets really interesting for oil prices.
With threats from Houthi rebels escalating, we're now looking at some potentially major supply disruptions. Analysts are actually warning that if these shipping routes get compromised, oil prices could spike to a pretty alarming figure, $140 a barrel. A number like that, it sends shockwaves through the entire global economy.
And you can see that domino effect so clearly right here. It all starts with that geopolitical risk, which leads to supply disruptions. That, in turn, pushes oil prices way up, and then suddenly, bam! You've got rising inflation all across the globe, hitting everything from manufacturing costs to what you pay to fill up your car.
So, what does this all boil down to for you? Well, it's kind of like a double threat. Higher oil prices could mean more expensive stuff at the store, and at the same time, all that market volatility puts your investment portfolio directly in the line of fire.
Okay, let's bring this threat right back home to India. A new report from Ernst & Young, or EY, has put some actual numbers on just how significant the damage could be for the Indian economy.
Yeah, the EY report puts a really stark number on this. A prolonged conflict could shave a full percentage point, that's 100 basis points, off of India's GDP growth. Now, for one of the world's fastest growing economies, that is a major slowdown.
And it's a real double whammy. Because while growth is slowing, inflation could surge by 1.5 percentage points above the RBI's target. That just means higher prices for everything, and that hits family budgets hard.
And by the way, if you're not totally familiar with the term basis points, it's pretty simple. 1 basis point is just 1/100th of a percent. It's just how people in finance talk about these small changes that can have a really big impact.
The EY report also points to specific sectors that are right on the front line. Think about industries like paints, chemicals, tires. All of them depend heavily on crude oil. So when oil prices go through the roof, you better believe their production costs do too.
The takeaway here couldn't be clearer. A conflict happening halfway around the world can directly hurt the Indian economy. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how interconnected everything really is these days.
So, with this really uncertain economic backdrop, how are India's big companies reacting? Let's zoom in on a few key players and see their strategies in action.
Okay, first up, we're seeing some big money moving in from abroad. Abu Dhabi's IHC is pouring almost 8,850 crores into Zman capital. Now that's a massive vote of confidence. It signals that even in a risky environment, international investors are seeing some serious long-term value in India's financial sector.
Now, in contrast, over at HDFC Bank, the focus seems to be all about stability.
The board is expected to back its current CEO for another term. And in a time of global uncertainty, the message is pretty clear. Steady, predictable leadership is the top priority.
And while some companies are focused on stability at home, others are looking outward. PB Fintech, for example, is using its IPO money to fund a 34 crore rupee expansion into the UAE's insurance market. That's a pretty clear sign of its global ambitions.
And finally, let's turn to a really interesting puzzle inside one of India's biggest and most well-known companies. Because while external threats are one thing, Hindustan Unilever is facing a completely different kind of challenge, one that's internal.
Just take a look at this. When you compare HUL's brand lineup from 2016 to today, something really surprising jumps out. It's largely the same. For an entire decade, they haven't launched a major new blockbuster brand from scratch. And this innovation gap, it helps explain why the company's growth has been kind of sluggish.
So what does this all mean when you put it all together? You've got global conflict driving up inflation, which is squeezing the Indian economy. At the same time, you've got companies making these bold bets on growth, while giants like HUL are struggling with their own internal innovation. It's this complex web of risk and strategy that leaves us with a really crucial question. How do you even begin to navigate this landscape to make smart financial decisions?